Every history of China, nearly 4,000 years of emperors, dynasties, and golden ages, begins with the same kingdom. It is called the Xia. There is just one problem. No one has ever been able to prove it was real. The Xia left behind no writing of their own. Not one inscription, not one word carved by their own hands that so much as says their name. Nearly everything we know about them was written down more than 1,000 years after they had supposedly vanished. So at the very foundation of the world's oldest living civilization sits a question historians still cannot answer. Did China's first dynasty truly exist, or was it invented? So let's go digging for the truth. The story as it has been told for 3,000 years begins not with a king, but with a catastrophe. A great flood had swallowed the lands along the Yellow River. For generations, it was said, the water rose and never fully fell. Fields, villages, and whole valleys drowned beneath it, season after season, with no end in sight. It is China's version of a story almost every ancient people seems to remember. A great deluge at the beginning of the world. A man named Gun was given the impossible task of stopping it. He raised dams and dikes to hold the waters back, and he labored at it for 9 long years. He failed. The flood broke through every barrier he built, and for that failure, Gun was put to death. The task fell to his son, Yu. And Yu tried what no one before him had dared. Instead of fighting the water, he chose to guide it, cutting channels and dredging the riverbeds to lead the flood, mile by mile all the way to the sea. For 13 years, he worked without rest. The legend says that he passed the door of his own house 3 separate times, and 3 times he refused to step inside until the task was finally done, and the waters fell. For mastering the flood and saving his people, Yu was said to have received the mandate of heaven itself, the divine right to rule over all. He divided the rescued land into 9 great provinces, founded a dynasty, and gave it the name Xia. Then Yu died, and something changed forever. For generations, the legendary sage kings had chosen their heirs by merit alone, Yao handing the throne to Shun, and Shun to Yu himself, each time the worthiest man rather than the nearest son. But this time, power passed to Yu's own son, Qi. It was the birth of hereditary rule, the bloodline succession that every Chinese emperor would inherit for the next 4,000 years. The Xia, the old texts tell us, endured for nearly 470 years, through the reigns of 17 kings, and it ended the way countless Chinese dynasties after it would end, with a tyrant. The last Xia king, Jie, was remembered as a cruel and ruinous despot until a rebel lord named Tang rose against him, destroyed him, and founded the dynasty that followed, the Shang. It is a powerful story, but buried inside it is a problem, and a serious one. Every word of that account was set down more than 1,000 years after the Xia supposedly fell. The dynasty first surfaces in texts from the Zhou era, and our single most important source, Sima Qian, was a historian writing around 100 BCE, more than 1,000 years downstream from the events he describes. The Xia themselves left nothing behind in writing, and here is the detail that unsettles scholars the most. When we read the oldest Chinese writing ever found, the oracle bones of the Shang dynasty, the Xia are nowhere in them, not a single mention. In the 1920s, a circle of Chinese scholars finally dared to ask the dangerous question aloud. Led by Gu Jiegang, they became known as the Doubting Antiquity School. They had noticed something strange in the records. The earliest, most ancient kings tended to appear latest in the writing, almost as if each passing generation kept adding fresh layers of legend onto the front of history. And they raised a startling possibility that the Xia dynasty had not been remembered at all, but invented or vastly magnified by the far later Zhou. Why would anyone do such a thing? For power. The Zhou had just overthrown the Shang, and they needed to make it look righteous. So they told a story that the Shang had themselves once overthrown a corrupt and fallen Xia, which meant the Zhou were merely repeating history's verdict, the same moral tale conveniently doubled, and a first dynasty to make the whole pattern feel eternal. A few scholars push the idea even further, suggesting that Yu the Great himself may not have begun as a man at all, but as a god slowly reshaped across the centuries into a human king. For decades, the Xia existed only on paper, a story with not one brick to stand on. So archaeologists set out to attempt something extraordinary, to dig a lost dynasty out of the ground. In 1959, near a small village called Erlitou in Henan province, an archaeologist named Xu Shusheng went searching, deliberately hunting for the ruins of the Xi, guided by the places named in those ancient texts. And what he uncovered stopped everyone cold. Beneath the farmland lay the ruins of a city, a real one, dating back to around 1900 BCE. This was no humble settlement. Spread across some 300 hectares, it was the first true state ever seen on Chinese soil. Vast palaces raised on platforms of pounded earth, planned roads laid out on a grid, craft workshops, and the tombs of an elite who held power over thousands. And in those workshops, bronze foundries, and a yard for working turquoise, sat the earliest Chinese ritual bronzes ever found, the sacred vessels that would remain at the very heart of Chinese civilization for the next 2,000 years. At its height, this city may have held 20,000 to 30,000 people, a staggering concentration of life and power for the age in which it rose. It stood in the right place, it rose at the right time, and around 1600 BCE, it gave way to the early Shang. Exactly as the ancient text said the Xia had given way to the Shang. For most Chinese archaeologists, the conclusion is now settled. Erlitou is the Xia, the lost first dynasty found at last, and the search has never stopped. As recently as 2024, the largest settlement of this culture yet was pulled from the earth. There even seemed to be a clue in the ground itself. In 2016, scientists reported traces of an enormous flood that had ripped down the Yellow River around 1920 BCE and argued it might be the real disaster behind the legend of Yu. But other researchers pushed back, and hard. The dates, they said, simply do not line up, and a flood, however real, proves nothing about a king named Yu or a dynasty called the Xia. It was, they warned, just one more layer of story laid gently over the silence. Because here is the one thing Erlitou has never surrendered in more than 60 years of digging: writing. No inscription, no record, not one carved word that names the people who built it. Nothing that says plainly, Xie. For all its palaces and bronze, the city stays silent about its own name. Without that name lifted from the earth, many scholars beyond China remain unconvinced. A magnificent Bronze Age city stood here, beyond any doubt. But is it the Xia of legend, the dynasty of Yu and the Great Flood, or simply a forgotten culture onto which we have pinned a name borrowed from a far later story? And the question weighs more than it seems, because it is bound up with identity itself. The Xia is the first link in the chain, the very beginning of China's dynastic age, and a cornerstone of its claim to one long, unbroken civilization, stretching back more than 4,000 years to the dawn of its Bronze Age. But before we close the case, remember the Shang. That dynasty too was once waved away by skeptics as a myth, a name in old books with nothing solid beneath it. Then the oracle bones surfaced, first noticed in 1899, when a scholar spotted strange ancient symbols carved on so-called dragon bones being sold in a pharmacy as medicine. Traced back to the earth at Anyang, they came crowded with the names of Shang kings. And overnight, the myth became history. Erlitou may yet do exactly the same. All it would take is one word, still waiting in the dark. So the verdict stays open. But whether the Xia were flesh and blood kings or a story told around later fires, one thing is certain. Something real did rise on the banks of the Yellow River 4,000 years ago. A first spark of cities and bronze and power. And from it grew everything China would one day become. The first dynasty may be lost to proof, but its children never stop telling its story. Empires fall, people remain,